Okay. Hey, 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 hey. Boom. Here we go. What's up, good people? Welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. Welcome back to your real life. Um, the good corners of the interwebs. You know. Today we are getting into checks, balances, and the oldest con, part two. Part two, indeed. Part one was quite the quite the episode, if I do say so myself. Kind of want to pull it up for you guys, or I might be able to just show you the image. Yeah, I can just do that instead of trying to do too many tabs. Um, show you guys the the thumbnail from my last the oldest con video. Here it is, and then hurry up. There we go. At the stage, boom. Checks and balances, right? You see on the left, we got the We the People, um, Declaration of Independence and whatnot, uh, where they acknowledge rights don't come from governments, and then at the same time establish a government to protect rights. Um, you have the people, you got the courts and enforcement, you got the agencies, administrative state, and you got the appointed power, and then of course you got who writes the rules at the top. They chose the checkers. One of the key elements of this video was the concept that the checked chooses the checkers. What does that mean? It means, well, checks and balances is one of the mantras of our government that is designed to create a false sense of security in whoever is being subject to the abuses of the government. And this mantra in particular, checks and balances, is supposed to help create the illusion that there are internal mechanisms to the machine that prevent it from slippery sloping itself into tyranny, where other governments and monarchies of our time are based on tyranny. Our system of government has built into its core checks and balances. The only problem with that is it's the government that chooses the checkers in the balance, right? It's the criminal gets to choose the judge and the jury and the prosecutor, right? The legislature approves the or confirms the justices, right? Seniority runs the legislature. Um, the executive is uh also in cahoots with both of the other major branches. There's no escaping it, right? There's no escaping it. So that is that. And today's image, we are, as you can see, going to react a little bit to the Real Baron podcast. Shout out, you know what I'm saying? Shout out. That's too big. Yeah, I'll get small again. So checks and balances, the oldest con, part two, the gerontocracy. The gerontocracy, where you have a scale, right? You got the people over here, then you have seniority, committees, power, influence, and funding, and nothing. Amounts to absolutely nothing. But all of these things, as we'll talk about when we're under mind control, uh, weigh, you know, just as much as we do. Because we are the ones that give it the weight. System won't change, right? It rewards the con. So let us kind of dive in and get right into it, shall we? Oh, actually, first, housekeeping. Please like the video, subscribe to the channels, if you will. If you're here, then you're in for real conversations. All right, we talk about natural law, religion, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the great. We talk about money, anarchy, culture, and how mankind is manipulated from the shadows by forces that do not have our best interests at heart, perhaps because they are completely evil. But we are not bashing faith systems here. We are simply examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories that we have the most faith in, the ones we have the most stake in, if you will, and how those stories help shape society. Now, that examination has to sit right alongside an honest look at the current human condition, which is slavery. Government is slavery, as we will get into today. And the question we have to keep coming back to, keep returning to, is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works? Now, if any of that makes you uneasy, makes you a little angry, or uncomfortable in any way, please be assured, reassured that although you are 100% encouraged to stay, hang out, have a good time, and maybe confront some of those feelings, you are also welcome to leave at any time. After you like the video, you are welcome to get on out of here and live your best life somewhere else. Okay, now, without further ado, my good people, Checks and Balances Part 2. We are back in the Checks and Balances series today, and I want to start with something before I get into the clip. Last time that we established the foundational logical problem with America's system of government, we talked about the checks and balances. The government established to prevent the concentration of power is itself a concentration of power. The checker is selected by the checked. Every branch grows its own branches. The founders wrote about the danger of concentrated power extensively and then built a structure that concentrates power, operated by people whose inner storytellers were shaped by decades of managing enslaved human beings before they ever sat down to write a constitution. Today, I want to go a layer deeper, past the design problem and into some of the operational realities of how power actually moves within the system once you are inside it. And I'm going to let Mr. Baron Coleman of the Real Baron podcast do some heavy lifting for us, as he does run a high IQ outfit over there, and what he has to say is very important for us to know in a lot of regards. And he's going to explain some of the structural, you know, reality, because he laid it out really well. And then we're going to connect what he describes to my philosophy, to the inner storyteller framework, because this is not just a policy problem. This is not just a government internal inside the government problem for the government to solve. Okay? It's a story problem. And once you see the story underneath the structure itself stops looking like a design flaw and starts looking like a feature of this thing called government. So, first and foremost, let us get into the script. Can I? Or maybe I gotta remove it. Stop screen share. And then screen share again. Sorry, a little cleanup here. Share. Now I can. Okay, here we go.
Mitch McConnell's 84. Mitch McConnell was sworn into the Senate in January of 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, what were you doing in January of 1985? I'm sure a lot of you weren't alive.
I wasn't.
There's probably more than a few of you in this audience who were not alive in 1985. January of 1985, I was 5 years old.
I
I'm
was not alive.
46 years old now. I've lived an entire life. I've gone from kindergarten through high school to college to law school. I practiced law at 3 different firms, opened my own firm, worked at a bank, worked at a health tech company, worked at an IT contractor as in-house counsel. I've been on a radio show for 6 or 7 years. I've now hosting a. I've had a wife, 8 kids, a grandkid. I've lived a lot of life since 1985. That was before I started kindergarten. That's a long time to be in the United States Senate. In comparison, Lindsey Graham has served a paltry term, only 23 years. And it would be easy to sit back and blame them and say, oh, they're so greedy. Oh, they're so power hungry. They won't give up power. They just cling on to it. And there's some blame to lay there. There is.
Obviously, there's a lot of blame to lay there, right? That is if you're in government and you have the opportunity to stay and possibly do less work and just rely on your network to get things done, and but you're not really in it for the people, you're gonna stay and you're going to do everything you can to never not have to never be kicked out. That's just the way that cookie crumbles. But by all means, Baron, continue.
But you also have to understand how the Senate is structured, because this happens a lot, particularly in the United States. And it happens some in the House where people just won't give up power and they die in office when they're like 91. But in the Senate, I mean, the Senate is basically a retirement home. It's a geriatric ward. It's a bunch of zombies being pushed around in wheelchairs, given God knows what dozens, maybe hundreds of drugs every month in order to just stay upright and alert, just to be able to extend their finger and push a button. And when they can't push a button, they elbow the guy next to him and he pushes the button. I mean, it's unbelievable what these people go through to stay in office. And yes, you could argue Mitch McConnell is afraid to give up power. Lindsey Graham.
Yes, Mitch McConnell. It's not too much arguing. It's more so like I believe so, right? We believe because we have common sense that keeps them in the seat because they're not for the people.
Was afraid to give up power. In Lindsey Graham's case and Mitch McConnell's case, maybe there's more of that.
But and we're going to get into today, after we finish reacting, exactly where their power comes from, because it's not where you think.
In Alabama, there was a guy named Richard Shelby. He served in the Senate since 1986. He just retired a few years ago. His old chief of staff, I think, or someone who used to work for him named Katie Britt, is now the senator there. And I think she got in office like 45. And if she follows his steps, she'll retire when she's 85. She'll be there for like 40 years. And
crazy.
Again, it's easy to blame that person and say, hey, that's not the way government was structured. But the way the Senate is set up now, your state is at a significant disadvantage when you elect a geriatric person for the first term. Like Tennessee is getting ready to have a Senate election to replace Marsha Blackburn should she win the governor's election. It would really behoove Tennessee to hire someone in their 20s or like 29, 30 years old, whatever the youngest age you can legally serve in the United States Senate, and then stay there for 55 or 60 years, because the way the Senate works is absolutely everything is run by seniority.
Now, obviously, on this channel, we don't agree with what he just said about, what the smartest move is. It doesn't make it not the smartest move as far as practicality for one's own family and one's own personal gain. Because they'll get to sit in the seat and they'll get to be the decision maker and whatnot. But no. Anytime you put yourself in a position where you are granted this idea that you have a right to rule over your peers, you're wrong. Okay? You're wrong for having the job. Anyway, that's a little bit beside the point. Just wanted to say I don't endorse that part of the message that, yeah, it's smart to, get somebody in their 20s and have them be in the government for 50 years. See what kind of number that does on their mind and what they start doing to the people that are considered their constituents. But anyway, we're getting very close to the point that he's about to make that is just very golden. Check it out.
Down to where you are seated for the State of the Union address, where your guests are seated, where your office is determined by seniority. Where you serve on which committees is designated by seniority. When you're the chairman is designated by seniority. It's not a meritocracy. It's a gerontocracy. The older you are, the more power you have. The longer you've been there, the more power you have. And so it's possible, and I'm not sure this is entirely true, but it's possible some of these people just love their state. Like if Mitch McConnell gave up his seat 41 years into office, he gives up all that seniority, all those trappings of office. And then Kentucky starts over from the bottom. And now they're scrapping for every federal dollar they can get, as opposed to just having Mitch McConnell go, back up the brink truck to Frankfurt. Put it in Louisville. Dump it out. Back the gold up and just spread it around the state. Put a little in Bowling Green. Drop some off in Owensboro.
So he's talking about how seniority somehow gives you more control over funding for your state in the Senate.
Don't worry about the appellation.
Along with everything else in your career and in your general occupation having to do with seniority in general.
Bowling Green. Drop some off in Owensboro. Don't worry about the appellation people. They're fine. They haven't had anything for like 200 years. They don't notice. But everybody else, we need money. Just spread it around. It's easy when you have the seniority. That's how it works. While Richard Shelby was in his twilight years, Alabama got everything. They got Space Force. They got a new NASA headquarter upgrade. They got the FBI. They got a deep water port.
All of those things suck. It sounds like I'm arguing against Barron too, and I'm not. I'm just I'm just inserting my opinion. When people stay in positions where they delude themselves to think that they can rule over their peers for long periods of time, what they bring in sucks every time.
All this was only because Richard Shelby had been there like 200 years. He served with Abraham Lincoln. Seemed like. Had Richard Shelby not been there, they wouldn't have gotten any of that stuff. None of it. They would have gotten none of that stuff. And so it's the problem. We have to disincentivize staying there forever to the individual and to the state and to the body. We have to tell people, hey, after 12 years, your seniority is out. You are no more senior than anyone else. At that point, it's either going to be a lottery pick or whatever to determine who goes where. If you don't want to have it be a meritocracy, if you don't want to say, hey, this senator's pretty sharp, he knows a lot about the Army, maybe we should put him as the chairman of armed services. If you don't want to do it that way, then make it a lottery pick. Who wants to serve on armed services? Okay, everybody go into the thing. You all got 12 years service? Great. Bill Smith from Wyoming, you're the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Who wants to be on banking?
Okay. So now that, that part, he's pretty much just kind of half in jest saying, here's a way to structure this whole thing away from this gerontocracy. This, as you get older, the more power you get. And man, I am very excited to talk to you all about my take on how it is so incredibly ludicrous in so many ways that's the situation in the Senate, that we have a gerontocracy. And we very much do, as he described. So here we go. The Mitch McConnell timeline alone is worth sitting with before we do pretty much anything else. Okay, he said January 1985. Barron himself was 5 years old and has since lived an entire life. Right? School, law school, 3 law firms, worked at a bank, health tech company, radio show, wife, kids, grandkids. 8 kids, by the way. 8 children. 8 of them. Shout out. In the same time that Mitch McConnell has been in the Senate, Barron Coleman has lived a sort of complete adult, a complete growing up and then being an adult and like establishing something that's pretty much where you're at. Life. Complete life. right? Not a complete life, as in, as soon as you reach Baron's age, like if you've done enough, you should die. Like no, but a complete life as far as he's done a whole lot of stuff. And if we as a human species weren't so tied to this game, this religion of monetary value, then he's definitely lived enough life to like stop working and just focus on um family and random projects that he wants to engage in. Now, ask yourself honestly, what drawer did that information get filed into in your mind? For most people who were raised inside the civic mythology of American democracy, so to speak, the 41-year senator information gets filed into the experience and wisdom drawer almost automatically, even if you disagree with his stances in politics. That general symbol of a long seated politician usually is logged in the back of the mind as experienced and at least expert, if not wise. 41 years means seasoned. 41 years means knowledgeable. It means networked. 41 years means he must have earned that position somehow, even if I disagree with him. But Aaron is asking you to look at what 41 years actually produces structurally. And the answer is not wisdom, right? It's not constituent service or service to the people that they're supposed to be serving. It's not that. It's not better ideas and better judgment. No, what 41 years produces is called seniority, right? And seniority in the United States Senate is everything, which directly points to the fictional nature of governance in general in such a blatant and in our face way. Where you sit, where your seat is at the State of the Union address, okay, it's when the president talks about progress and plans. Where your guests sit, which office you occupy in the hallway, which committees you serve on, when you become a chairman, how much authority you have over the direction of federal funding, all of that is structurally governed by seniority, as reported by Barron, which is insane, right? It's called a gerontocracy. The older you are, meaning the longer you've been in a seat, and since age happens that way, the older you are, the more power you have. The longer you've been there, the more power you have. The Richard Shelby example that Barron gave is one of the most concrete illustrations of what seniority actually produces in practice. Alabama received Space Force, a NASA headquarters upgrade, the FBI, a deep water port, not because Alabama's needs were the most pressing among any of the other 50 states. Not that any of these uh, Space Force, NASA headquarters, the FBI, or a deep water port would solve any needs that Alabama people have anyway. But not because Alabama's needs were the most pressing out of any other of the 50 states, not because Alabama's senators had the best arguments or the most compelling visions, but because Richard Shelby had been there for long enough that his seniority gave him the leverage to direct federal resources towards his state in ways that newer senators simply cannot access or command. And here's the inner storyteller angle that Barron may miss because he hasn't read my book yet. At least he doesn't go into it explicitly, right? The senators who stayed the longest aren't primarily keeping their seats because they're power hungry villains only. Some of them may be, but the more honest and more damning explanation is that the system has been designed, whether deliberately or through accumulated institutional logic coming together. It's been designed so that even a senator with genuinely good intentions has every structural incentive to just stay forever, right? He says if Mitch McConnell gives up his seat, then Kentucky loses all of that seniority and starts from the bottom. Now Kentucky is competing for every federal dollar rather than having Mitch McConnell walk in and tell him to back up the Brinks truck. A Brinks truck, if y'all didn't get that joke, is a truck that carries around cash to different businesses that transact and carry cash. Brinks is a brand, I think a brand name for that service. Anyway, that's the point. They are incentivized by the structure of the checks and balances government, or the government with that feature in it, to stay forever, to stay in power, right? And it's devastating because it means the system makes staying the moral choice, not even just for the individual, but for the state, so that they can have access to the funding, some command over the funding, and other aspects. At least it feels that way. It's not really that way because government is still going to suck regardless. But it feels and we believe as a general public as well as the senator sitting in the seat that it's even better for the state that he just stays forever. The institution has fused the senator's personal interests with the state's interests with the institution's interest into a single thing. And that fusion is a trap. Because now examining whether the arrangement is actually good, right? Whether this is how power should work in what they call a representative government feels like arguing against your own state's well being in a way. Well, it's game theory. Well, if we didn't do it, somebody else is going to do it first and we get annihilated, right? The inner storyteller files examination of the seniority system into the hurting your own people because of your ideology drawer instead of the civic scrutiny drawer, if you will. Right? That's how word magic works. Good people, we talk about word magic every episode. You know what I'm saying? The sorting function and the symbol of longevity. Here's where I want to connect this directly to my framework. The sorting function of the American public, of the collective inner storyteller, has been trained to associate longevity in office with wisdom and experience or earned authority. Just like a lab coat on a doctor, we are trained to associate the lab coat on the doctor, like the lab coat and the title, with the same wisdom, experience, earned authority. That filing in our sorting function happens before conscious evaluation can occur. You hear 41 years in the Senate, and something in your inner storyteller, in your mind, says that the person that has the 41 years in the Senate must know things, must be uniquely knowledgeable, must be uniquely networked, That person's seen a lot. That person's earned their positions somehow, some way, even if I disagree with them. But wisdom and time served are not the same thing. You can do a lot of time served in the mundane or in the bad conditions and not gain from it. You can spend 41 years inside an institution and become more deeply conditioned by that institution's logic, more submerged in its protective relationships, more insulated from the consequences of your decisions, and more dependent on your continuation in the seat without developing any wisdom that helps the human family along in our shared objectives, whether the institution itself is producing what it claims to produce for the people it claims to serve or not. In fact, the longer you're inside the institution, the harder it becomes to examine yourself honestly anyway, right? It's that phenomenon. The longer you've been in the room, the harder it is to see the room's blemishes, the imperfections. Because examining it honestly would require you to look at something your entire identity, survival, income, and sense of belonging is fused with, right? You're tasked with looking at that, something like that and asking, is this actually good for me? Is this actually good for the people of Earth? People that I am trying to serve? Is what I'm doing here actually serving the people? And that's the same question that the first Checks and Balances episode was asking about the founders of this nation. People smart enough to see the problem clearly and name it, but not willing or maybe not able to see themselves as a part of the problem when they establish and institute a concentration of power in this way, right? This is still their government. The senator who stays for 41 years is not necessarily corrupt in the conventional sense. Probably is, but it's not necessarily. It's not a guarantee that on day one they're already corrupt, necessarily. They may genuinely believe that they are serving their state. The system has simply arranged things so that serving themselves, serving the state, and serving the institution of government are all pointing in the same direction in the inner storyteller, in the programming of the mind of the senator, right? The inner storyteller never has to resolve the conflict between self interest and public service because the structure has made them feel like they're the same thing. Now, that's sophisticated, right? That's a sophisticated form of a manufactured mentality, not a story simply installed from the outside through repetition, but a story that the institution's structure guides you to arrive at yourself. And it's the same pattern everywhere, unfortunately. The same psychological structure that appears in every institution humans have built, in corporations, right? The C suite is populated by people who have accumulated decades of institutional relationships, not necessarily the people with the best ideas or the clearest vision, right? In the medical industry, seniority and credentials track time served and institutional enmeshment rather than the quality of patient outcomes or your track record in the regards that deal with the health of the people that you serve. In academic departments, you have tenure. Tenure determines who controls the curriculum, the hiring, the research, funding. In banking, the people who have been inside the network the longest control the relationships that determine who gets access to the capital. Even in gangs, the OGs, right? The OGs who are active hold authority over younger members, regardless of who among them has either better judgment or some good ideas on how to be a better organized rebellion against the system and not just a chaotic group of angry men or something. In every single one of these institutions, the same structure produces the same result. The people with the most power are the people most completely fused with the institution's continuation because their income, their identity, their relationships, and their sense of belonging, their sense of meaning, all of it is bound up in the institution remaining exactly as it is, which means the institution's interests and their personal interests merge. And that convergence produces institutions that prioritize self perpetuation, meaning, and since it's fused, it produces individuals that prioritize self perpetuation over the stated purpose of the Senate, of the government every single time. The stated purpose is, of course, to um, what are they? What's the little oath that they all have to say that they um, uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution is supposed to be a document that preserves and protects the rights of the people within the geographical boundaries of our nation. It's all word magic, right? We talked in part one about how the American experiment was the literal pinnacle of governmental design for a long period of time. Well, long in comparison to like a single life of a human being. Not that long as far as governments and nations are concerned. But for a period of time, a significant, meaningful period of time, the United States of America was the pinnacle of governmental design. And other countries felt that way, y- and we obviously arrogantly felt that way too. And yet where we are today, this is what it's produced, right? The dealership car lots are full of cars and they're not selling. The housing market is trash. The banking arena is self-serving and garbage for the people that it is supposed to be helping secure their lifestyles. Um, Factory work, it's getting harder and harder to find something that pays enough to do physical labor. Construction, you got, fights between unionized and not unionized and all of these things. What it produced is the education system. You already know, if you've been on this channel for any time, how we feel about the education system. Um, but like the internal structures of the education system is as well. This is what it produced. The pinnacle of government design produced garbage because the idea of a small group of people that posture themselves, position themselves as fit to rule over their peers is already garbage. And garbage in, garbage out. Because the psychological structure underneath every institution built by unexamined inner storytellers like this produces this pattern, regardless of how elegant the constitutional architecture is. This is an unavoidable conclusion to the establishment of government, even if the people, the slavers that create the government, say that they care about freedom in all of the founding documents. say that they care about the teachings of Christ in all of the founding documents, even if they write them in all of them. The gang that forms the rebellion against the oppressive system becomes the oppressive system in his own neighborhood. Not because its founders betrayed their values per se necessarily, but because the same unexamined human desire for security, status, right, some sort of fame, notoriety, recognition, worship, right, their sense of belonging, and their access to resources that run the rebellion, they change the story. And now you're acting in ways that run against your objectives as a rebellion, as a gang that formed as a rebellion to the system. And I don't encourage street gangs to just be out here street ganging. But, there are gangs that had their origins documented, and their origins were to be a rebellious force, an organized militia, if you will, against the tyranny that they were experiencing, right? Now, Barron calls this seniority problem a gerontocracy, or points to the structure within the government as a gerontocracy. I say also it's just a tradition within the religion of government. It's a weird tradition within the religion of government. Just like any other religion, government has its rituals, has its hierarchies, it has its sacred objects, sacred symbols. It has its accumulated traditions that exist not because they produce outcomes that the religion claims to be all about, but because they serve the institutions that administer the religion, right? Serves the departments and everything that serves and administers the religion on behalf of the body, the government. Seniority is one of those traditions. It sounds procedural, sounds administrative, sounds reasonable, right? Sounds like a reasonable way to organize a large group of people. But what it actually does is ensure that people with the most power over the country's resources are the people most completely conditioned by the institution itself, the ones most completely inured and most insulated from the consequences of their decisions and most dependent on its continuation, right? The longer you pay dues, the more access to the sacrament that you receive, and the sacrament is controlled by you after a short while. So, in conclusion, let's talk about why it can't fix itself. Barron's proposed solutions are worth naming because they're honest, even if they're unlikely, and I completely disagree with all of them. He said capped seniority at 12 years. First of all, that wouldn't happen because the personalities we're dealing with just wouldn't even. But capped seniority at 12 years. And after that, everyone is equal, regardless of time served. And you can put your names in the hat for certain decision making power, right? Assign a committee that positions it everything by merit, your track record, what your expertise is in, what have you, or by lottery selection. Either of those would disrupt the incentive structure that currently exists, and either of those would remove the structural reason to stay unless you're like 90 or so and you can't push the button, as he said. You got to tap somebody with your elbow and they push the button for you, right? But I want you to notice something. What would implementing those changes actually require? Right? If we were to implement 12 years and either organized by merit or lottery selection, what would those changes actually require? It would require the people who benefit most from the existing seniority structure, which are the most senior senators, to vote to dismantle the advantage that they spent decades accumulating and that those who were above them as they were accumulating hazed them into. It would require the institution to reform itself in a way that directly reduces the power of of its most powerful members. It's the same problem we identified in part 1, the checker selected by the checked. And so then it's time for the checking to take place. And so the checked bullies the checker into reporting that the checking was done and everything is all good. Right? That's the inevitable way that that plays out. The institution cannot reform itself because the people with the power to reform it are the people uh, whose power depends on it remaining unreformed. And here's where the inner storyteller work becomes the most honest answer to the structural problem, because the structure can't cannot be reformed from the inside. The only lever available is the willingness of the population to withdraw the deference that makes the whole arrangement possible in the first place, which is our obedience. Our obedience creates the reality of their authority. Our obedience fuels all of the energy that goes into their decisions and their projects. The seniority system works because enough inner storytellers of us are filing longevity into the wisdom and authority drawer without examination. The moment enough people are able to sort of get that through our thick skulls, the moment that the symbol of longevity in a position producing automatic deference starts producing the question of what are the actual fruits of them being in a seat for 41 years, the spell loses that substrate, it loses its foundation, it falls down. The spell fails as soon as enough people question what the truth is. And that's not a political solution, it's not a legislative problem, it's inner storyteller work. It's noticing the stories that we tell ourselves that justify our patterns of behavior and justify our turning away from the systems that are causing and maintaining and upgrading our enslavement. And so, question we keep coming back to on this channel is, what story are you willing to live? And with that, good people, we can call it a day. Please like the video and subscribe to the channels. It helps a lot in my pipe dream of one day monetizing this show here. I want to thank you so very much for hanging out. Tomorrow we do talk with Sarah Cross. Sarah Cross will be here in the building tomorrow. And yeah, man, we'll see you then. Check it out.